Thank y'all for having me. Nobody told me it was going to be a potluck. I would have put in my order. I'm going to grab a different podium. I'm not going to be able to fit this one. All right. So, while they're getting the slideshow pulled up, are there any missionaries in here? All right. I like that answer. I wasn't sure what kind of answer I was going to get. A lot of people have this idea of a missionary as the guy with the funny-looking vest and the pockets who gave up his life to go somewhere else and pulled his family into a village in Africa or something. Like Matthew 28:19 and 20 says, "Therefore go and make disciples." But that word "go," in Greek it's "poruntes" or something like that. I don't speak Greek. But it means as you go. So it's translated more like as you live your life, make disciples. As you go to work, as you go to school, as you go to Walmart, as you go, make disciples. And it does go on from there to say, go therefore and make disciples among all nations. And Acts 1:8 says, you will receive power, and after that the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and in Samaria and into the uttermost parts of the world. So there is definitely that command to leave home sometimes. That's not necessarily everyone, but there is that command. And those of us who are called to leave home, we're not different. We're not like poster boy. I am certainly no poster boy. I'm not the guy that growing up everybody just thought that I was different, and then I became a missionary, and so now everybody's like, that guy is just, he's special, he's set apart. Well, I mean, we're all set apart. God has a plan for each and every one of us. We are all set apart. But God's plan for me so far was to go to Denver. He's telling me each step to take, one step at a time. And that's the same way with all of you, with all of us in this room. For some of us, it's to go home and make disciples in our family. You are a missionary. For some of us, it's to go to school and share our faith with our friends. You are a missionary. For some of us, it's to go to work and share the gospel with our coworkers. You are a missionary. Everyone who is called by God and set apart as a child of God is called to be a missionary. So, you'll have that poster over there, Make Jesus Known. It's got the goal for how much y'all are wanting to raise for the Annie Armstrong Easter offering. But more importantly than the money that sends people on Annie Armstrong offering is that we as the body of Christ unify ourselves, not just sending people to go away, but also asking God, where am I supposed to be going? Am I supposed to be going to work? Am I supposed to be going to another city? Am I supposed to be uprooting my whole life to go to another country? When you tell me to go, is that for a week? Is that for a couple months over the summer? Is that indefinite? Am I supposed to possibly go for the rest of my life? As a Christian, we are called not to write a blank check up to our life. We're called to write that check with our life in the value line. I don't use checks, so I don't know what that's called. But I'm not here to preach a sermon. I needed to start by making sure we're on the same page about what a missionary is. Because if you don't view yourself as a missionary, but you view yourself as sending a missionary, then maybe you're missing out on something that God is calling you to do. And I'm not just talking to the people in here who are in their youth. If you're alive, God has a purpose for you. If he didn't have any more purpose for you, then he would bring you home. He wants to spend eternity with us, and he wants to be, like, for us to be in his presence. But he wants that for more than just us. And so if you're still alive, he still has a purpose for you. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Maybe the other button. There we go. These are pretty much all the pictures of me that I could find. So my family is, I don't know which way y'all are seeing it, so I'm not going to try to tell you where on the screen the pictures are, but that's my mom and my dad. Like I said, I'm just really not good at taking pictures. I don't have any pictures of my sister being with us. I believe that's my only picture of my mom and dad that I have. I need to do better about taking pictures. I just never think of it. But I'm very close with my family. They brought me up in church. They brought me up as they stood up and as they sat down and as they walked along the road, they were talking about God and they were quoting scriptures to me, and they were making it very clear to me that God is not religion, that God is not out of reach, that God is a friend and a father and a leader, and that the only way that I can get through life is by fully relying on God. And so I had, an upbringing that pointed me towards looking to God for everything. And I'll get into that a little bit more, how that has affected me in just a minute. But, let me go back to that. There we go. So then there's the yo-yos. I am very big into yo-yoing. I've got a few hobbies: running, pool, yo-yoing. My friends actually call me Joe-yo because Joseph and yo-yo put together. I'm a blacksmith. I really love to be outside. I even tried to grow a garden in my room. I was using seed. I'm not very good at growing stuff from seed. I have to have the plant, so I'm going to have to try that again. I just wanted y'all to know a little bit about me. Try to relate a little bit more so that I don't come across as the missionary who went somewhere. I'm just a missionary the same as y'all are. There we go. So this is part of my team. I spent the last 2 years in Denver, Colorado. I love Denver. It is a great place. I love the people there. 95% of the people in Denver, Colorado, in the United States of America, do not claim to know who Jesus is. We see a church on every street corner here in Tennessee. And I know before I went out to Denver, I kind of viewed America as being a place where if you were searching for God, all you had to do was open your eyes because there was guaranteed to be a church somewhere in your line of vision. But then I went to Denver, Colorado, and I found 95% of people who didn't even know who Jesus is. And I had been sent there for spending the summer being a missionary to them. And so I kind of thought, all right, this is really cool. This is going to be an awesome opportunity where I get to share the gospel with a bunch of people who have never even heard of Jesus. And I get to just minister to people who they're hurt and they're sad and they're lonely. Denver is a very, very lonely place, especially after Corona stuff hit. The suicide rate skyrocketed because people are lonely. I don't remember how many people are there, but it's millions of people live in Denver, and they're lonely. And all of that is true. I did get to go and share the gospel to people who had never heard the gospel before. And I did get to build community with people who didn't have community. And I did get to love on people who just felt unloved. And I got to do it with these guys. These were the guys that I lived with. We lived in a dorm building. And so we were together literally from sunrise to sunset, well, more like midnight, every single day. We became family to each other. We were the ones who were encouraging each other, who were, just discipling each other even, and leading each other on to just do the ministry work that God had called us all there to do. And there were about 20 people on my team each year, and we were divided into smaller groups that all worked together in different areas of the city. And we did a lot of different kinds of activities. There we go. So the main thing that we focused on while we were there is what we called third spaces. And so a first space is either work or home, wherever you spend the most amount of time. Your second space is the other one, either work or home, wherever you spend the second most amount of time. And then a third space is a place where you can go to be around people who are going to be the same people, not necessarily every time, but just enough that you can build relationships with people who aren't necessarily Christians. You're not meeting them at church, and they're not your work relationships. They're your friends, but I mean, if you're honest, for most people, and if you don't have work friends that are not genuine friends, if you have genuine friends at work, that's really awesome. Most people have work friends, and that friendship is it's based on work. And then you go home and you have your family, and that's awesome. But then you go to your third space, maybe a rock wall, maybe a coffee shop. These are places in Denver that were common third spaces. There was an ice cream shop, which the biggest picture in the center, we were heading to an ice cream shop, and we were bringing a few of our friends with us because that was our spot where we would go and we would hang out and we made friends, and then we would minister to those friends. And it wasn't let me sit down and share the gospel with you. It was brought up in casual conversation, maybe just a snippet of the gospel here and a snippet of the gospel there. And I mean, it was done kind of like you would bring up football. You're not thinking, well, I'm having a football conversation right now. Go me. We were trained to find our identity in being the disciple that Jesus loved. I'm pretty sure it was John. Never referred to himself as John in the entire book until the very, very end. He always referred to himself as the disciple that Jesus loved. And so we took that as something to learn from so that we could identify ourselves as the disciple that Jesus loved, so that we could go have scriptural and gospel conversations with people without it being this awkward conversation. And so that became something that we then could take home with us. We were only there for 2 months. And during those 2 months, we saw God move in big ways. God doesn't need a whole lot of time to move. God is on the move already. So we saw God move in big ways in Denver. But we were there for 2 months. And then we got to come back home to the people that we had already been investing in and to the people who we could continue investing in, and we got to continue doing that. So it wasn't just a mission trip. It was a training of how we can live the rest of our lives on mission. And that's not to say that you need to go somewhere to get that training, because God gave us 66 books compiled into one book where we can learn about him. And he gave us the ability to pray where we can have a relationship with him. And so, you already have all the tools that you need. But it's, being able to go somewhere where there's not the distractions of people know you for who you used to be. Nobody knew me as the child that they babysat in nursery. Nobody knew any of the mistakes that I had made in my life. And so they didn't know me as that person. And Jesus said it himself. People don't listen to a prophet in his own town. If you babysat somebody in the nursery, then when they grow up and they start speaking in the truths from the Bible, then there typically is a different, you'll be listening to them and you'll be thinking about, how God has worked in their life and whatnot. But it's not typically it's not like those words are stirring things within you, because you still see them as that child that you babysat in the nursery. And so, getting rid of those distractions allows you to fully open up, to fully just let God work and see what happens when you let God work. And so we had events such as coffee. We gave out free coffee on Mondays, and it was kind of a street evangelism type thing. People would walk by, hey, do you want free coffee? Some people would say, yeah, and they'd stop and they'd get coffee and go. And some people would be like, sure, I'll take coffee, and then they'd stop and they'd talk to us for a while. And the goal, of course, was always to tell them the exciting good news about what Jesus has done for us and that he can do it for them too. And to pray for them and just to minister to them in whatever way God brings the possibility of ministering to them in. And we would have block parties where we would set up a popcorn machine and a cotton candy machine and a bouncy house, and people would come to us and we would have fun with them, and we would tell them about Jesus in casual conversation, and there was Colfax, Soul of Denver. Colfax is the most dangerous road in North America as far as violence goes. Actually, it may be the second most dangerous. I don't know, something like that. It used to be a really nice road. People would take it from Denver up into the mountains before the interstate was built. And so there were hotels all over the place that were nice. There were, nice restaurants and stuff. And then when the interstate was built, nobody went through there anymore. And so it just kind of fell into ruins. And it became a pretty dangerous place. And so now what you see is a bunch of old, rundown motels and really scary looking McDonald's, But I was able to spend quite a bit of time on East Colfax. And I was working with a group called Jesus on Colfax. And so we would go to Colfax, and we would go to one of the motels. There were 3 motels that we mostly worked with. And we would have picnics. There's like a Bible study that they would do in one of the motel rooms. There's even a store that people, instead of just, they would go up to them and say, hey, I need clothes, and they would get clothes and go. They would go and they would earn points, kind of like you would earn money, and be able to spend those points in the store. And that way they could keep their dignity. They could earn what they needed based on what they were capable of doing. And especially since a lot of them, they were normal people who just didn't have identity, like an identity card or something. So they couldn't get into an apartment, or maybe they had a felony record and so they couldn't get into an apartment. And so they were living in these motels and they were struggling to get by, but they had all of their abilities, like they were fully capable. And so we were able to give them their dignity and the things that they needed. And through all of that, we shared the gospel with them, and we spent time with them. And most of them were living in, actually all of them, were living in extreme trauma. And so we were able to be that, that solid place where they could go. There were a lot of people who did not believe in God, who were living very, very different lives, constantly on drugs and alcoholism and things that we might look at as being poor decisions that they don't look at as being poor decisions. They just look at it as the way they're living their life. But they would always see Jesus on Colfax as their friends. I mean, like, seriously, the first day I showed up to Jesus on Colfax, because I was in Jesus on Colfax, not a one of them knew me, but because I was in Jesus on Colfax, they knew that I was their friend, and they knew that I was there for them, and they knew that I was there to tell them about Jesus and tell them about the exciting things that he had done in my life. But these people would come to me, never seen me before, and just open up. It was, really, really awesome experience. And through that, I've always known, well, probably not always, actually I can tell you I was 7 when God told me that I was going into ministry. So I've known that I'm going into ministry, but I never really knew exactly what it is that God wanted me to do in ministry. And I obviously still don't know my whole life plan, what God has for me for the rest of my life. But because of the work that I was able to do with Jesus on Colfax, he was able to show me that he wants me to move into a homeless / socially impoverished ministry of some kind. Still working through that, but he was able to teach me what it is that his plan for me was. If I hadn't gone to Denver, would he have still done that? Yeah. I mean, because I make one mistake, I don't think that God is going to just throw his plan out the window, right? But I would have missed a lot. Maybe he wouldn't have even shown it to me by now. It may be years down the road before he shows me that that's what his plan for me was. And so I would have missed so much because I didn't answer his call to go. I'm going to tell you, when I first heard of Gensend, I immediately knew that God was telling me to go. There was no doubt in my mind. I knew that God wanted me to go on Gensend. I didn't know exactly where, but I knew that he was telling me to go, and I was terrified. I mean, every summer I had been out of school and I would spend time with my family and I would work. I didn't work during the school year. I only worked over the summer. So giving up my summer meant giving up money. Plus I had to pay for the trip. I didn't have to pay for the whole trip, but I had to pay some for the trip. So it meant giving up money. It meant giving up means of making money. It meant giving up my entire summer. So I wasn't going to be with my family, wasn't going to be with my friends, I wasn't going to be with my norms. It meant stepping out and doing something that I had never done before. It meant going somewhere by myself. Like, I didn't know a single person in Denver until I got there. So I was terrified. And I didn't act on it immediately. I didn't wait real long, but I stepped back and I said, okay, yep, I see what you're saying. I know for sure you're telling me to go, but if you're really telling me to go, tell me again. And so he did tell me again, and so I called my parents and I was like, hey, I gotta go. I gotta go to Gensend. And I was terrified of that too, because I knew that my parents supported me following God in whatever God told me to do. But I also knew that that meant that I wasn't going to get to see my family. And they knew that I wasn't going to get to see them and that they weren't going to get to see me. And so that piled on top of Satan just not wanting me to go. I was afraid to bring up the conversation where I was telling them I'm not coming home for summer break. But I had that conversation with them, and then I raised the money and I went to Denver, and God blessed me and God blessed people around me. And then the next year, before I even made it home, I was praying like, God, I'm not going to go until you tell me to go, but please send me. And it only took a couple weeks before God said, all right, I'm sending you. And I said, hold up. I know you're telling me to go, but if you really want me to go, say it again. Because I was terrified. I had just given up one summer, that meant that I had given up my pilot's license that I was hoping to get because I wasn't going to be able to afford it. And now I was looking at giving up another summer. And so even though I had been begging God to send me again, I was still terrified. And I still took a step back and said, all right, but tell me again. And so he did tell me again, and I went again. And both years, I would say I took away one main point, one main thing that God really taught me that changed my life. So the first year, God taught me, I already knew that I had never saved anybody, right? And I couldn't save anybody. But I had a friend who had grown up calling herself Christian, my best friend. And she had a couple years before that, decided that she didn't believe in God anymore. And she cut my family and me out of her life and moved away. And it really wrecked me. I mean, I got to the point where I was contemplating suicide because I thought that it was me. I knew that I couldn't save her, but I still put the pressure on myself, put the responsibility on myself to be the one who was going to save her. And I constantly prayed for her, which is great. That's what we should do. But I prayed for her like it was my responsibility to save her. And I was in Denver, and we were in training, and somebody said that we can't save anybody, not news. And they said that it is our job to learn how to float. They said if you get pulled out into a riptide in the ocean, you can swim and swim and swim with all your might, and eventually you're going to sink. Or you can float, And eventually the current is going to carry you back to shore. And you may not be where you thought you should go. You may not be where you left. Things are going to be different, but eventually the current is going to carry you back to shore. And it's the same way in regular life. The riptides are going to carry you out. And you can either try to fix it on your own and sink, or you can float and trust that God will carry you to where he's planning for you to go. And so at that moment, I learned from my head knowledge to my heart knowledge what it actually means for me to minister to somebody. It's not me trying to save them. It is just me obeying whatever it is that God tells me to do and floating and letting God do the work. Because if I'm trying to do the work, I'm working against the current. So the second year, I was extremely homesick. I was so glad to be in Denver, and I was so missing home. And there was one day in particular, it had just hit an all-time high. I was tired, I was homesick. Anytime I was alone, I was bawling my eyes out. Anytime I wasn't alone, I was fighting back tears because I didn't know these people. They even, at the end of our day of training, they took us to an amusement park. And I cried the whole way to the amusement park. And then I got out at the amusement park and I had a blast and it was great. And then I cried all the way back to the dorm building. And when I got to the dorm building, I went across the parking lot and to the top of a 4-story parking garage. That was just, it was an empty parking garage during the summer. So it was a really great place to go pray. I could be by myself. I could look at the city. I could watch the sunset. And I could just spend time with God. And so that was the place that I would go. And I went there that day. And I was propped up against the wall, not saying anything to God, just being in his presence. And God said to me, "Who am I?" Not who am I. God said, "Who am I?" So who is God? And I was like, where do I begin? I started with Elroy, the God who sees me. That's my favorite name for God, because who am I that God sees me? And God said, "What do you see?" And I said, "Well, I see the amusement park that I was just at. There's a whole bunch of lights, a whole bunch of chaos, a whole bunch of people. I see cars going every direction. Who knows where they're going? 95% of them don't know where they're going. I see people hooping and hollering down on the streets. I see that guy over there who is, on heroin. I see the city over there. The lights are still on in the skyscrapers. They're hard at work trying to figure out what it is that they're missing in life." And I just kept on going, and God said, "Stop. You see Satan roaming around, just absolutely showing off his power. You see distractions. You see everything that Satan is trying to do. Look at me." It's like, why didn't I think of that? Right? I mean, I was in the most chaotic time that I had been in a long time. Not because there was a lot going on in my life. My life was great, right? But because I was looking at all of the things that Satan was doing. And as Satan was running around frantically trying to deceive anybody who he could deceive, God was sitting on his throne. God was peacefully, calmly, completely overthrowing everything that Satan was doing. And so at that moment, in my mind, I could see the glory of God sitting on the throne, pouring peace into my life, and even into the city that I had just seen full of chaos. I now saw the peace of God hovering over the city. And I have a very low attention span. Even while I was still there, I took my eyes off God and put them back on God, and took my eyes off God and put them back on God. But I learned what the peace of God actually is. God needed to take me to a chaotic, crazy place in order to show me peace. And I wouldn't have been able to go if he hadn't supplied me with the way to go. And he supplied the Annie Armstrong offering. And he supplied people to, donate money to me to cover my part of the way. Both years that I was in Denver, I had about 20 teammates. Last year, I was able to get the numbers. There were 385 total people who went as a missionary to a city for Gensend. There were 5,370 registered gospel conversations. And so, that's just the gospel conversations that we're told about. There were probably at least 10,000 gospel conversations. Every single one of those conversations was a seed planted, a seed watered, or a harvest. There are 26 cities that Gensenders are sent to, and there is way more than just Gensend that the Annie Armstrong Easter offering sends people to, sends missionaries to. And every single person who is sent out comes back home with tools, with knowledge that they didn't have of who God is, that they can then bring into their home community and spend the rest of their life serving God with it. So there are 3 things that I want everyone in here to do. The first, and by far most important, is pray. That includes praying for those who are sent. That includes praying for the cities and the people who they're sent to. That also includes praying about where you're sent. Not if you're sent, where you're sent. Are you sent to work? Or are you sent to another city? Are you sent to another country? Just praying with an open mind that God will show you exactly where he wants you to go, and then being faithful and obeying that call. The third thing I want you to pray about is pray about giving, And if God tells you that, he's not wanting you to give anything to this, then that's because he has something else planned. If you have given him everything that you own and he tells you not to give any to this particular offering, then that's because he's taking care of it somewhere else and he has other plans for you. And if God is telling you to give more than you feel comfortable with, that's because he's going to take care of this with what you've got, and he's going to take care of you by some other means. So just pray about, or pray for those who are going, pray about where you're supposed to go, and pray about giving. And then do it. Do whatever it is that God tells you to do. Because the God of the universe, who knows every one of us by name and has a plan for every one of us, he has the best plan. I reckon that's all I've got. I went a little longer than I figured I was going to go, but thank y'all for having me.